Welcome to this particular webinar called Driving Educational Equity Through Open Educational Resources, a replicable model. We're very excited today to be here with you as we explore these really important ideas. What we're going to be doing today is walking through each of the different components of a recent case study that was published about some great work happening in Alberta, Canada. Adelee, before I go any further, can you see my main screen with our images on it or not?
They were there and they've gone away. We're seeing a screen
Just
with a bit of a rock background.
No problem. We're going to audible then. We're going to keep all of our images here. And what we're going to do is we're just going to move forward in this manner. So what I'd love to do is to give everyone a little bit of a background on our time today and our panelists and all of that. So again, my name is Rich Dixon. I'm the Senior Director of Innovative Learning here at Hāpara. And in this webinar, we're going to share a replicable model that makes student-facing curriculum and that has a special focus on open educational resources, as well as professional development resources, readily available to all members of the learning communities of which all of these school leaders represent today. And we'll be addressing educational equity through this. We're going to discuss about how we use Hāpara's Student Workspace Digital Backpack as one way to create a high-quality repository of learning resources to meet the needs of your learners. So a little bit of a background on why we're here. Less than 2 years ago, educators from Alberta, Canada, some of whom you see here on your screen today, and I'll introduce in just a moment, created a complete shared collection of curriculum resources with teachers throughout the province and ultimately the world. 9 different collaborating districts, including folks from the Edmonton Regional Learning Consortium, have embarked on a large-scale effort that provides valuable and essential resources in this initiative. And the 7 districts that were involved with the work so far include Buffalo Trails Public Schools, Horizon School Division, Grand Yellowhead Public School Division, West Wind School Division, Northland School Division, Sturgeon Public Schools, and Livingstone Range School Division, all in Alberta, Canada. And we're really excited today to be able to introduce the following panelists who are going to explain what this initiative is, kind of the why for it, how it came to be, and a bit more about some of the nuances of both creating and sustaining an initiative like the one that we're going to be talking about today. So first up is Adelee Penner, who's the Learning Facilitator at the Edmonton Regional Learning Consortium. And then Kristin Basaraba, the Career and Academic Advisor at Parkland Composite High School. Heather Rentz, the Innovation Coach and Learning Services for Buffalo Trail Public Schools. Stephen Ripkins, Supervisor of Learning Services and Educational Technology at Grand Yellowhead Public School Division. And Sean Nicholson, Secretary Treasurer at Grand Yellowhead Public School Division. So with that, you're going to get to hear from all of these expert educators that were at the ground level of being able to create a consortium that created a collection of high quality open educational resources to help foster educational equity. And my first question is for you, Adelee. Can you provide some background on the problem this initiative is solving and your vision and the group's vision for how this collaborative intends to address this problem?
Absolutely, Rich. Thanks for being here. And I'm really excited to be in with this group of people. They're a pretty amazing group, and I'm excited you get to hear from them all today. For us to say that this initiative started just a little over 2 years ago might not be totally fair. So I'm going to take us back just a little bit longer, if I might. Heather is here representing Buffalo Trail Public Schools. I had the pleasure of joining them for a while. And during that time, I think if we look at a problem of practice for our panel discussion today, we were really looking at how might we come together as a group of school jurisdictions to share practice, to create learning activities and opportunities for students that would move our learning forward. Like every school jurisdiction, we were thinking about how can we continue to grow and meet the needs of our students in a rural community. We didn't have access to some things that others might have. And so how could we come together as a group? And Heather and others in Buffalo Trail have this wonderful philosophy around what if we shared? What if we openly shared what we were doing with others and brought them on board? And during that time, just to set a little bit of the culture of Alberta, there was a group of people coming together to monetize some of their work in Hāpara. And then there was a group of us, I don't know, the little country mice, who were saying, what if we just shared? Like, what if we just came together? And so Heather and I and Sai, as some of you know, we held a lunch and learn. We invited others to come. And we started to invite people to say, could you connect with us? And we had the privilege of connecting with others in Canada, but we were really looking at how in Alberta could we solve our problem of practice together? How could we come together? And then we had this amazing opportunity called COVID. This one day when all of a sudden we said, we're going to go online and we're going to stop. And, you know, Heather and I and many others had a call going, okay, we've been building this for 3 years, anytime, anywhere, any place, learning. But today, everybody cares. All of those professional learning pieces, all of those things, all of a sudden, everyone's going, what did you say again? How do we do that? And so in our conversation, we said, it's time to come back to that group. And so we connected with Wayne and others in Hāpara to say, can we get together and can we start to really look at what this could look like? And so in that first year, Horizon came on, as you've mentioned, and we created between Buffalo Trail and Horizon a significant amount of content for synchronous learning. And then when fall hit, we learned that in Alberta, one of our biggest providers of asynchronous learning that was sponsored by our Alberta government was going to be privatized. And so we had 1 year to collect all of that learning and bring it into asynchronous. We came back and said, okay, peeps, like, could we have more people join us? And could we solve this problem together? And so because of the work that Buffalo Trail and Horizon had started, others were interested, and as you mentioned, we're at 7 and growing as we continue this conversation around, okay, so we've started to bring some content and look at our learning goals together. How might we look at other pieces of equity? So some of the resources, and I know that'll come out in our conversation, how can we continue to pair and grow this work with others, share the costs as a team, share our expertise. We have different expertise sometimes in rural communities. You've got this amazing physics teacher, and how do we share that with all of the other schools who don't have an opportunity to hire that particular individual, and other jurisdictions of expertise we don't have. So how could we leverage all of those pieces together and continue to solve this problem of practice? So I think in the beginning it came from a place of let's move learning forward, and then it moved into okay, we have this thing, and we have an urgency, and as we move forward and we continue our collaborative conversations, I'm excited with Sean and Stephen and Kristin, as we've had some conversations about where could we take this resource piece, how can we continue to build equity in rural school jurisdictions, and who might want to come on board and continue to build and curate those resources with us.
That's great. Thank you so much. That's a great overview. And before we move on to the next kind of different question, just to build off of this first one, are there any other panelists that would like to maybe give us a little overview of the context geographically and some of the challenges related to getting access to high quality educational resources that may exist within Alberta and within the school systems there? And if not, Adelee, you can jump in on that one if you want as well.
I can speak a little bit to Grand Yellowhead. We're a fairly large division, spanning over 300 kilometers and 5 major zones. Our largest high schools are in around the 550 to 600 student range. So we don't necessarily have the same resources that schools in urban centers with several thousand students have. In addition to that, as Adelee mentioned, not all of our schools with their populations have access to the same degree of specialization from some of their teachers. So Hāpara's been useful in helping us to democratize that access.
Excellent, thank you. Anyone else on the panel that would like to follow up on that?
I was just going to echo what Stephen had said. We are extremely rural, and I can't remember how many kilometers we extend, but there are some teachers that are, not only do they not have grade level partners, but they are the grade 1, 2, 3 teacher who is also teaching Phys Ed 10 and grade 6 science. And then next year they might have grade 4 health. In just having this opportunity to be able to say, hey, there's a workspace for that has just dramatically changed people's perspective and their willingness to take on new things in schools, as some of our rural schools are getting smaller and dealing with challenges of budget.
That's great. Thank you so much. That context is really helpful. And I think that moves us nicely into our second question. Heather, if you would be so kind as to respond to this, what was the result of your collaboration? And how did you create a safe and trusted workspace where teachers would share their work with one another?
Well, our sharing perspective, as Adelee alluded to earlier, has always been part of the BTPS culture. So I joined in 2001 as a substitute teacher, and very quickly I learned in the school I was at that everyone was willing to pitch in and help. And it was a little bit different than my teaching experiences of the past, where teachers had their binder and it was their binder and you had to make your own binder. And as I joined the school as a staff member the following year, I just couldn't believe the people that were like, hey, I use this, go ahead and use this. And it was a very big idea that we help each other out. And it's just grown from that as a division, because I said earlier, we are so vast and some of our teachers have so many multi-level classes that we met depends on the year, but between 2 and 4 times a year as an entire division. And we would bring all the grade 1 teachers together, the grade 2 teachers together, and whoever wanted to meet. If you wanted to meet as science, if you wanted to meet as music, and at the time, if you wanted to meet as French, you could join a group. And then our idea was to come up with a project. And as the collaboration built within the division, we moved towards inquiry. And then just workspaces just naturally fell into that, because at first we were housing it all in Google Drive and there were folders and everyone's stuff was everywhere. And workspace was just the answer for that. So long before COVID even started, we started a pilot project with, I think, 5 of our schools in Buffalo Trail, and they had access to workspace. And at the time I was still in the classroom and I was not one of the schools. And at the time I was teaching French just for a term, and I had kids in grade 1 to 6, and we were new to Google, and I was really excited about using it. And then the following year, I joined Buffalo Trail as an educational technologist. I learned the power of workspace, and my question was, why wasn't I the school that got to pilot this? It would have been a game changer. So I've seen workspace from its infancy without sections, without colors, and it's just been amazing. We did a lot of collaborative projects with teachers in different buildings. So there was a teacher in one school, and then they would meet with the class from another school 100 kilometers away. And as co-teachers, they were there, and we were able to work together. We were able to collaborate with one another. The students were able to meet with a link through Google Meets. It was just amazing. So that brought us forward to COVID 2020. And I don't want to say it was a disaster, because it really wasn't. It was just like between Adelee and Katrin and I, like we just really quickly came up with a plan and said, we use this and we use this and we use this, and how can we help you? And teachers just started sending in links to their workspaces. They were private, and we said, hey, like, would you share? And then that's where sharing is caring kind of evolved. And so we built a spreadsheet of our shared workspaces, and then we started cold calling. There's teachers that I know that were using workspaces. I'm like, hey, we're missing some workspaces for math. Would you be willing to share? And our spreadsheet just grew and grew and grew and grew and grew. And then people, you know, they were just so excited to be part of the initiative. And it's just, I don't know, like sharing has just always been part of who we are, and it just kept going. It was amazing.
So great. And for those that are watching this webinar and may not be familiar with what Workspace is, Heather, might you or anyone else on the panel be able to describe what a workspace is?
Well, a workspace is basically like a teacher website, I would say. It works as a place where students would log in and they find all of their work. So it's similar to how Google Classroom is with a stream, and I'm not very familiar with Google Classroom as we've always been workspace, but teachers can put in videos, teachers can put in links to their notes. It's Google compatible with all Google tools. So if you have a Jamboard that you want the students to work collaboratively, if you have a YouTube page, you can use it as a flipped classroom and put your videos in. You can use it as blended and put them in after. It's just any way you can think of to customize it, and people have been so creative. It's just basically your week, your unit, your year. It's whatever you need it to be, but it's a great way for students to digitally access information 24/7. So if they're on that ski trip or in Hawaii for a week, no problem. They can log into their workspace and get their work done.
That's a great overview. That's excellent. Is there anyone else on the panel that would like to respond to kind of the results of the work and maybe how you were able to create a safe place where educators felt that they could share their work with others?
I'll add in here. So I was a part of the summer project here where we were transferring resources from the asynchronous learning provider in Alberta to our division's Hāpara platform. So being a rural community, we can't necessarily offer the wide range of courses that have potential to be available, or we have a very small timetable in the sense of numbers of classes offered through the year. And so by pulling over these resources, these workspaces, you can actually utilize them in an asynchronous environment. And so we have students utilizing them, taking them if they can't fit a course in their timetable, or maybe it's not offered till the next semester, or those kind of things. And it's allowed a lot of flexibility in helping students achieve those academic goals for themselves, and allowed us as teachers to become more knowledgeable in the different content areas. So for example, I'm one of the teachers that works in that independent learning environment, and I'm marking material from biology, from social, from English, CTS courses, because the content's there and I'm able to use it as a platform where students can follow the guide themselves, ask for support when they need them, and I can give formative feedback while they're working right on it. And it's been a really huge asset out here. And then I'll branch off of that and say that we have new teachers within our building, and some of them have been utilizing the resources for first time teaching certain courses, which has been a lot of fun, and even experienced teachers look at it for supplemental resources to shake up things in their courses. So it has been very beneficial for us where we are.
Thank you, Kristin. That's super. And I think that leads at least me into a question for Steve, specifically around the technical support. We're talking about technology. We know sometimes that can be a challenge if something, say Wi-Fi or something goes down. What kinds of technical support did this initiative and does it require in order to be successful?
So one of the beauties of this project is it actually requires very little technical support. Ensuring that you have full integration with Google is quite important. There's a couple of little things. One of the things is making sure that your secretaries are entering students' emails according to your school domain in PowerSchool so that it syncs properly. There's a couple of little things like that, but overall, the technical requirements are fairly minimal. Chrome browser we find works best. Yeah, the other thing that goes along with that, and I won't go too far down this rabbit hole because I think Kristin's going to speak to it a little bit later, but is making sure that you have the technical capacity within your teachers to actually utilize the platform and to support one another in creating and implementing workspaces. There are a few tech resources out there that are useful and worth mentioning though. And I have to give a huge shout out to Adelee here because she is a fantastic resource for all of the technical questions we've had moving forward. But there's also the Hāpara community, which is hapara.community.com, which has a huge number of questions and responses to all kinds of different technical issues that may arise. And within there's also the Hāpara Champions courses. So there's 3 ISTE level or ISTE certified courses that educators can take to support their development in their Hāpara journey. So yeah, the tech requirements are not stringent, thankfully.
That's great, super. Anyone else on the panel have any insights as well, or any tidbits that they've learned in terms of the technical support?
I just would say that, you know, I think one thing that was really took me by surprise, getting to know Hāpara and getting to know the community, was how responsive they are. You know, we could be in a classroom, Heather could be in a classroom, some of our team could be, and we could hear something, or you know, we could be working on it together. And I'm just giggling because Heather and I both like to color code, and we were really concerned sometimes about could we organize some things, and you know, Heather put in a request about, can we start to get some color? Can we start to be able to personalize the workspace? Can we start to do those things? And of course, we got a response. Now, as we're moving through that digital backpack, I mean, this is pioneering. This is new technology. It's the first time this kind of a backpack of resources has been put together, tied to a learning management system. And we're tying it to not only a global library, but personal school jurisdiction libraries within a province or a state or a country. There's so much specialization that Hāpara is willing to do within that. And then right down granularly to, if I'm a teacher and I create a resource, I can put that into the backpack. And so all of that comes with some checks and balances. And so being part of this group who's moving that work forward in Alberta, we have just been really blessed with, okay, as soon as we have a glitch or we see this thing didn't upload in the library correctly, we have an opportunity to speak to tech and have it sometimes moved overnight, and sometimes it takes a little bit longer because there's a glitch. And so I think for folks who are listening, if you're not familiar with Hāpara, this is not like some of the other tech companies in terms of you have access right to text right away who are listening and looking for screenshots from you, which is different.
I'm just going to go ahead and second that. I agree with you. The responsiveness of the tech support has been absolutely phenomenal.
All great information as well. And I think as we might have some folks that are on today's webinar, or those that'll be watching it after the fact, that when we're recording this, may be wondering, Sean, specifically, okay, this sounds interesting, got my mind around the what of what this is, kind of why we're doing it, the technical support, but let's start talking about the cost. Now, we know that each school division and school district, depending on which country you're in, the cost is going to be a little bit different depending on a number of different factors. But I'd love to hear from you. What is or might be the rough startup costs and ongoing expenses of being involved in an initiative like this?
Yeah, so my first thought is flexibility. I mean, I think the base cost is roughly $25,000 to $30,000, depending on how you cut it. But I think there's a lot of flexibility in terms of what you can get and what you need for your division there, different utilities you can get and not get, just determining to meet your needs. I think obviously the biggest cost is time, the time of staff and people like that. I think if you're going to make the transition over, you need to make sure you're making that commitment and allocating the time and things like that. For our division in particular, our community practice is about 40 plus staff, I believe, Stephen, if you can correct me if I'm wrong. But we have allocated specific sub days to separate time out for them to do that learning. But you could be flexible in that and having them work that in your vision PD days and things like that. I think on the other side of this, though, especially with introducing instructional rounds in our schools, it kind of expands the instructional round beyond just the school setting and into our division. And we see some savings there where we don't have teachers needing to take sub days and travel to another school to go see another teacher teach and things like that. They can do it virtually through Hāpara, as well as all the resources in Hāpara and the books and things like that. We're looking to leverage some of those cost savings there over the years in terms of maybe going digital with some of our books and things like that instead of the hard copy.
Yeah, that's a great overview. Really appreciate that, Sean. Anyone else, either cost savings or things that you've kind of learned are costs for doing an initiative like this?
I just want to talk very briefly about the opportunity cost, which is to say, and Kristin alluded to this earlier, where we have new teachers who are having access very quickly to quality resources that can help guide them in their initial practice. And so you know, there's a huge opportunity there for new teachers to be very quickly inculcated into a strong and successful culture, and a time saving that goes along with that. So may not be a financial cost, but definitely a cost savings in terms of time and labor and energy.
That's a great point. Really appreciate that. Well, excellent. I'm going to move us along. Thank you so much for that, Sean. And Kristin, we've kind of gotten some breadcrumb teases already about some of the content that you're going to share here, but I'd love to ask you specifically more about, within this initiative, how professional development was leveraged and a support system ongoing for that, because we know that one-time PD or professional learning doesn't always work, and that we need some ongoing support. So you've developed a community of practice. And so can you tell us a little bit more about what the goal of it is, and what did it take to get this set up and to keep it going?
Awesome. So yes, our division created the community of practice, or we refer to it as the COP, back last March, which was organized by our district office. And I've had the pleasure and enjoyment of being on it since then. We meet once a month. We come together. We talk about the Hāpara platform, any new updates that there's been, and focusing on what it entails and how it can be beneficial to teachers and students within our division. So we explore the different aspects of Hāpara, and we actually build support materials for our COP teachers to take back to their respective schools to share with colleagues, in hopes that it allows them to become more confident and comfortable with the system, and allowing them to work at a pace and around time that they have available to them. During our COPs, some members have the opportunity to present their experiences or workspaces that they've created, showing the depth of knowledge of the platform across different areas of our division, and tips and tricks to help others implement their workspaces, either within classrooms or through independent learning. So in our division, there's at least one staff member from every school, if not more, that is participating in our community of practice, as well as our distance or independent learning programs as well, since now we primarily rely on Hāpara to deliver these materials to students. And it was a pleasure, actually. A lot of the members of our community of practice transitioned over into our summer turnover of resources. And so these members had the opportunity not only to work with each other through the COP, but then within our crunch time 3-week 20-person staff of transitioning these resources over. And it was amazing, the camaraderie and collaboration that took place. We had a communal jam board where we shared ideas and provided supports, and if something didn't work, where could we find the answer, and everyone was very, very supportive. And with our division being so large in terms of scale and driving distance, it brought all of us so much closer together in making those connections. I know we had our most recent COP last week, and right after our COP, I hopped on a Google Meet with a teacher out of Hinton to collaborate on how they were using Hāpara for their independent learning and how we could adapt or change our process to make it better for students. And so it has been an absolutely invaluable experience. And because of that teamwork and camaraderie, I think that within the 3 weeks, there was over 350 different workspaces made of materials, which was just absolutely amazing to see. And so grateful to have that community, which has continued into this year. We've had a couple of COP meetings already, and a lot of the members within have gone above and beyond and are taking the Hāpara Champion Scholar and Trainer programs, which allow them to develop a deeper understanding of the Hāpara platform and come back and share their knowledge and experiences. I know I just finished my 3rd one, and it's been a hugely wonderful resource. And then there's colleagues within the building that have taken it. And so, but yes, our COP has been a fantastic opportunity to do that collaboration, even though we're so physically distanced apart, and share those ideas. And so I'm very grateful for our district office for putting that together for us as teachers implementing the use of these workspaces within our classrooms.
That's great. A great overview. I think it's so encouraging to hear about the level of collaboration and being able to, I think as Heather talked about earlier, that sharing is caring initiative, and maybe we could unpack that just a little bit more for folks that aren't aware of what that was, the sharing is caring work, and maybe tease out a little bit more about how that helped kind of set people up for this initiative. Heather, do you mind taking a run at explaining that?
The sharing is caring started with our basically where I ended off. Like, we had our BTPS spreadsheet, and then we started reaching out to other divisions, and the first one that we got to was Horizon. And between Horizon and ourselves, we just started swapping. We had a really big need for CTS courses, as many people were, you know, you're in a small school, you're not teaching long hair design in a school of 75 kids, but if someone created a workspace for that and we were able to share it. And then so from there we thought, like, wow, okay, we can create anything. And then the news was dropped that the ADLC was retiring their content, and that put a lot of our online teachers and a lot of our teachers that were doing video conferencing in a bit of a turmoil, because those are the resources that they were using. So that's where this initiative moved forward, is that all of these different groups across the provinces were brought together. And what they did is created workspaces from, I don't know if kindergarten was in it. Someone will have to jump in and let me know if kindergarten isn't. Kindergarten isn't, but grade 1 to 12, and pretty much every course that you can imagine for the streamlined courses, including some K&E courses for grade 9. I know there's more and more coming. We keep talking about like what can be added, and it's just grown and grown and grown. So these courses are, like, I think it was Kristin that said asynchronous. So they're meant for students to be able to move through the course on their own with the assistance of a teacher if they need it. And my own daughter got to pilot the Chem 20 course, and she was like so wildly successful. And some of her teachers were looking over her shoulder and said, like, wow, like, this is amazing. Can we get a copy of that? And I said, yes, you can. It's in our library. So they were, it's really exciting to be able to see that students are given more opportunities, because we all work together as a province. Like, we've had this opportunity to meet for years, but you know, it was like through a tech conference that I'd meet a person or two, but now we're able to just jump on a call and all of a sudden this happened. But Adelee can speak more to where all the divisions got together and how we grew forward and all the work that was done this summer. But Buffalo Trail got to be a part of this amazing, amazing piece of work that we could just hand to our teachers this year and say, here you go. And one of our teachers just about cried. Like, she was so overwhelmed with what her year would look like without ADLC. And then she keeps emailing me and saying, oh my God, I just looked through the EL9 and it's amazing, and thank you. This is just incredible. So it's actually made the workload for our teachers a lot easier as well, and our students, but our teachers have just been so thrilled.
Thank you, Heather. Adelee, do you want to speak a little bit to that as well? In terms of what Heather was just mentioning, in terms of the logistics of getting going and all of that.
Yeah, you know, I think, you know, as Heather and Kristin have both mentioned, like when we look at the way different school jurisdictions are put together with Horizon and Sturgeon, a lot of folks have some different community of practice or different ways that they're building that piece. And when you bring that essential problem of practice together at a senior admin level, right, and you talk to other assistant superintendents and you say, how are you moving your learning forward? I think that's part of that impetus that we talked about early on in that piece, where we started to host those sharing and those lunch and learn meetings to say, you know, come and see what we're doing, invite us to see what you're doing, and then let's go from there. And then from there we see where those seeds germinate. And we've got some pretty modest folks on the call here today. When we're talking about how does that move forward, I can only bring people forward if I have some folks on my team who believe in it and some folks who are championing it. When we talked about creating a safe space for teachers to be able to wrap their head around, I'm going to be sharing with the rest of the province in their library. I mean, it's the relationships that Heather and Kristin in particular have built with their teachers, with their colleagues, to make it safe, to bring that forward, so that when people from the top are going, hey, we want to do this thing, they're like, we want to do it with you, right? So it becomes top and bottom up. Like it really was a shared, calling Heather, calling teachers, going, do you think we could pull this off? Because this would be amazing. Yeah, I think we do. Let's all figure out how to eat the elephant together, right? Let's figure out how we're going to take bite-sized pieces. We're gonna, I had the pleasure of meeting Sean during that time because I didn't know Grand Yellowhead that well. And just, talking to Sean, saying, Sean, do you think we can do this? Meeting Kevin, who was a former member of the team, and meeting Steve and saying, okay, let's put a community of practice together so that your folks can kind of share those pieces out. And then, from our second meeting in Grand Yellowhead, we had teachers coming forward like Kristin saying, hey, can I just show people what I'm doing in my classroom? That would be amazing. And so those teachers want to share. And then Sturgeon would like to share, and Horizon. And then you mentioned Livingston Range, Westwind was a part of, and Northland were a part of it. So we've had teachers coming forward. We also had an Alberta community of practice that we hosted in ERLC where teachers and principals could come from across Alberta to share ideas. And we had up to many different jurisdictions represented. Just coming in, it was a drop-in, come in, and teachers would come and say, I kind of want to work on math. And so we'd have a breakout room. Of course, it was Zoom because it's COVID time. So we had, a Zoom meeting of like 25 math teachers working together, and then science in another breakout room, and just popping in and out and seeing teachers work together, and then sharing that again with senior admin, going, this drop-in group is making a difference. And senior admin going, this drop-in group is making a difference right into the classroom. The kids the next day had a better learning experience because they were able to share together with colleagues than if we would have stayed isolated in our own jurisdictions. But it really takes that first piece around, Heather just being vulnerable and the team being vulnerable to say, come see our practice, because that's scary and you don't know how it's going to be received, right? And so for the people watching, I just say, do it. Like, just say, this is what we're doing, and you want to come do it with us, and roll up your sleeves. Find a group of people like the amazing people in this room who are just willing to be humble and roll up their sleeves together with you.
It's a great call to action, and absolutely. One thing I'd love to invite for our attendees on this webinar is to go ahead and drop any questions that you have for the panel in the chat box. I'm going to be asking a couple more questions, so as soon as we have a break in their responses, I'll have an opportunity to pose your questions to them. But I'd love to encourage you to reflect upon the questions that you have at this point and drop them into us, and I'll relay that to the panel. So as we're waiting for some of those to come in, I would love to hear about some of the challenges that were faced and how the team overcame that, because we've talked a lot about some great outcomes, which is amazing. Increased access. We have, in a sense, professional development happening during the development of these workspaces. We have more equitable access to these materials, regardless of where students live, based off of what Steve was talking about. It's not necessarily a super high-tech, really expensive initiative to have to set up and get going. But what were some of those challenges, and how did you overcome them? And this is a question that anyone can respond to.
Oh no, oh yeah, there you go. I'll hop in here. As a teacher that was just like what we were talking about earlier, that may have been in tears because ADLC was closing at the start of last school year. So one of the biggest challenges I feel was the initial shock of thinking what the scope of the project would be and not knowing what those next steps were. And then I wasn't a part of the discussions of looking at using Hāpara or anything, but once I did hear the name, I went and I looked and I'm like, okay, this could possibly work, but how could it work? And so that was the biggest struggle, was just wrapping my head around what we had to do. And then I worked a lot with Kevin, who had been previously part of the project, and just the scope about what we wanted to get done. And all right, we're starting small, and if we can get this done, then we can go to the next one. And in my head, I was like, all right, if I have to go and build all of these, I'm not sleeping for the month of July. But no, it was just, we put out that call and people came forward because they wanted to see this community to be successful. And they, from the COP, they saw the potential that the Hāpara platform had and how it could help students. And that was our underlying goal and the focus of, through the multiple discussions I had with team members and colleagues while we were building these workspaces over the summer and collaborating, is I want to make this work for the students. How do I do that? And support's coming forward, sharing of ideas, what worked, what didn't work. And so, yeah, the scope was a little intimidating, a little bit of a challenge, but once we got in there, we had passionate people that were excited to use the platform to help students, and it just flourished from there. And so, and every teacher I talked to that was a part of that, even now, I'm like, thank you so much for your hard work, because man, oh man, I don't know what we'd be doing right now. So, but yeah, so it was a bit of a challenge at first, but it was completely manageable once we got to that point.
That's great. Excellent. Thank you. Sean, any reflections from you, or Steve or Adelee, anything else to add on to that?
I would say probably with any kind of change, the biggest challenge is uptake. People get accustomed to what they're doing and don't like a lot of change. But that's where I think the community of practice helped a lot, and just the support from Central, and then us having training experts in the schools. I think that helped a lot us overcome that barrier. And yeah, just try to get the uptake in the schools. I think it's been actually really positive, to be honest with you, in our community of practice.
That's great. Excellent. Well, I'm going to throw in a slightly different question. Adelee, I'm sorry if I cut you off there. Did you want to go ahead and jump in there?
No, I can wait. I'm good.
Okay. I am wondering, what was the response like in your community? So parents, perhaps even other community members that may also be stakeholders, folks that have an interest in making sure that there are obviously some great learning outcomes with students, but also the further professional learning development for teachers as well. So how did the community respond to this? Your respective communities, I should say.
I can talk from the parent standpoint.
Great, please.
So by working with students, so currently right now through our independent learning, just in our school, I can't speak for other schools, we have over 250 students enrolled in a Hāpara workspace of some sort. And we have asked for a lot of feedback from students because it's their first year diving into it, and feedback from parents. And parents are very appreciative of how they can see the progression or what's expected of students or where they're going. The fact that it's integrated with Google is a huge saver, in the sense of what was a struggle before with transitioning documents and materials over to independent learning previously. And then for teachers, thinking about how teachers are able to carry it over, create their own workspaces, use it within classes. And then even now we're still struggling with the tailings of COVID, where teachers may have to isolate, students have to isolate, and then they have this I have a teacher in our space that also teaches Math 9, and she exclusively uses Hāpara. So if a student is at home, she's like, all right, hop on there. Your day's work is there. It's all easily accessible, ready to go. And that ease of navigation has been fantastic as well. So I've received really positive feedback from within our school.
Great, thank you.
I can certainly share some perspectives from some different school jurisdictions in terms of how parents are thinking. I think most parents would echo exactly what Kristin had just shared. So I think the piece I'd like to talk a little bit about is that digital backpack that we've been sharing about. I know in a few of our rural communities, having a public library sometimes is attached to a school, and sometimes there isn't access to books. And I know when the digital backpack first came online, some school jurisdictions made the decision to have all of the classic text available. And we received some comments back through central office teams and through principals of parents saying, this is amazing. When my kid goes to bed, I grab their device and I can read a book. And I have access to books that I haven't had access to in years. I don't have to worry about late fees. I don't have to drive into a big city to grab them. I don't have to, pay for Kindle and all of these things that sometimes don't work because we don't have great internet. But here I can, sit in this hub and have access. And I think when we looked at that equity piece around that dream about how do we, every kid in Alberta, how could they have the same quality of education, which is our dream. You have access to the same resources. It doesn't matter how far away you live from a big city. It doesn't matter if you can see a city or even a town or another house. Could you have the same thing in your hand? And I think that's the piece that we're starting to hear back around. Yes, you know, we had to stay home. We have students whose roads are not, they can't take a bus some days. COVID aside, they can't actually, attendance is problematic. And that doesn't matter anymore. I can still live my dream of being a firefighter because my teacher put my stuff online. And that's a real comment from a kid to their principal, to their teacher, saying, I can still do my dream. I still can go to university. I didn't think I could, but now I can. And I have access to books. I have access to textbooks if I can't take them home or I've forgotten them at school. And so I think that's the other piece, just to add into what Kristin has said about this unintended. I think Stephen coined it really well earlier in our talk when we talked about some of the unexpected, unintended consequences that turn out to be fantastic for our communities and turn out to be something that we can celebrate, when in the beginning it wasn't even on our mind that could be a piece that we think about.
That's so nicely put. I love that. And one of the things that we've talked about, of course, is workspace. We've also talked about digital backpack. And just to kind of summarize some of those things, both of those tools inside of, which are really a singular tool within Hāpara, really allow an educator to be able to individualize and differentiate content for all learners to best meet their needs. And that is really the intersection in this particular webinar of where equity lies, is the ability to ensure that high quality educational materials that may or may not have, and in fact, many times not been able to be accessed by all learners, are now accessible for anyone, including parents as well. And so that really addresses both economic and geographical boundaries that in the past may have precluded students from having access. And so that's why we're super excited and very passionate about this. And many of those resources are open educational resources. So let's just quickly touch upon what some of those open educational resources are. Adelee, you beautifully articulated some of the more classic literature before. We've talked about around the edges of some of the others, but what are some of the types of OER or open educational resources that have a license that allows any school to upload that content and distribute it freely to students? What does some of that content look like for you guys? And Adelee, feel free if you want to jump into right away again, that's great.
I was going to say, I think Adelee's an expert in this one, but I do know that we did get a permission from Core Knowledge to download some of their resources for textbooks and things like that, as well as a few others that I think Adelee probably has expertise in what's going on there. Yeah. Not to put you on the spot, Adelee, so sorry if I am.
No, you're fine. I just feel bad. I feel like I'm talking too much and that all of you have so much more to contribute. I think it'd be interesting because it's so new. I think it would be nice to come back in a year or so and take a look at our schools, which we're intending to do in Alberta, to bring teachers together from each jurisdiction and look at what resources are we using and updating them. So if we go back to an open resource, one of the exciting pieces is that the resource can be built to be tailor-made to a particular program of study, which has been happening. And we've got a group of people in Hāpara who are working on that. We have a group of outside educators that are working on that are doing a phenomenal job of putting together, for example, a science textbook in grade 3 that has never happened before. In Alberta, they've used different resources, they've used different pieces, but here now we've got some resources that are tailor-made to a program of study that teachers can bring in and kids can have access to anytime, anywhere, any place to be able to use as reference. And so that piece in itself is exciting. And then because it's open source, we can actually edit them. And so we're the jurisdictions we're working with, we're right now trying to decide what that format's going to look like, if it's going to be once a year or twice a year. But the idea is that we would bring teachers together across Alberta from the jurisdictions that are using the backpack and interested, and they would take a look at that math grade 7 textbook, take a look at the science 20 textbook, take a look at any of the textbooks and resources that have been created and curated, and say, okay, what is working in our classrooms? what is still meeting the needs of our students, and where are the gaps? What might we like to add? And we have the privilege, because it's open source, of being able to edit, revise these books once a year, and then bring them back. Because as you know, some of our other textbooks, they're outdated by the time they get to our shelf. And now we have an opportunity to have textbooks that are so much less money for all of our subject areas that now can be completely moved forward. And again, from a learning perspective, to bring teachers together and have the professional learning of thinking about what resources do I want to curate and bring into my learning environment, what is going to meet the essential outcomes and the needs of my students, to move that together is powerful. And to be able to do that as a cohort is some of the best professional learning that one can have and take in. So I know that teachers are excited to think about which textbooks or which resources they want to look at. And we're excited to think that we could have current, ongoing communication about how are we supporting students in their learning. And of course, we try to make people like Sean real happy, because it doesn't cost a lot of money. I mean, in terms of he's saving all the textbook money he's saving, I'm going to try to make him use for hosting, feed those teachers when they come together. But I'm kidding. But we're going to take a day or two of time, and yes, that costs money, because there's going to be some subs and there'll be some travel perhaps, and maybe a hotel bill, because we are wanting to have rural and remote communities represented in that conversation. But when we look at a cost of a hotel bill in the whole scheme of buying new textbooks every few years, it still is a significant savings. And then the ongoing professional learning of contributing is exciting to see where that's going to take all of us. And again, then I'm building capacity in teachers who maybe didn't get that chance earlier from that equity piece.
It's so well said, because it really hits upon each of the three very discernible outcomes, and there's many others, but today I think we've really focused in on what you just talked about. There's some cost savings. There's certainly the diversity of different types of resources to better meet the individual needs of students, just so access to that. And then the professional development that is part and parcel with going through and building those workspaces, and then thinking about how they're going to show up in front of students using the workspaces, and specifically the digital backpack. So that is absolutely wonderful. If you are thinking about how you might be able to get started, you've been inspired by what we've talked about today, I'm going to drop a URL, which I've just done, in the chat. And it is a short link out to a form. If you'd love to learn more about this, if you are interested in taking this conversation deeper, you'd like to talk with someone from Hāpara around how you might be able to start an initiative like this within your own jurisdiction, within your own district, maybe even ideas on how to partner with other districts so that you can get the capacity momentum that it was talked about today going for you, we would be happy to help you and partner with you in that. So again, there's a little link to a form where you can voluntarily essentially wave your hand and say, hey, I'd love to follow up and learn more about this. We also have a case study as well that was written up about this and beautifully summarizes some of the points that we talked about today. Today, we were able to go much deeper. If you'd like to be able to receive that case study, also just reach out and use that bit.ly, which again is in the chat, to be able to have access to that. So before we wrap up today, I want to thank each member of this team. You've provided us again with a clear vision for what could be when a number of different jurisdictions or districts get together and allow collaboration to happen. Additionally, you've also clearly articulated a sustainability and growth plan. You have clearly mentioned, Kristin in particular, the community of practice that you talked about building up and facilitating that allows ongoing professional learning to happen, but also helps those that are new undoubtedly get started and get going, which I think are another set of key factors. And then I think the vision for ultimately how this addresses equity. Equity in this particular webinar has been all around access to high quality learning materials. And as Adelee just beautifully summarized, the power of open educational resources means that they're flexible and they can be used at low cost to no cost outside of time and all of that in order to ensure that students have access to them. So these are just some of the discernible outcomes that we have talked about today. So with that, I want to thank Sean, Steve, Kristin, Adelee, Heather, for your expertise in explaining the journey to us, giving us a compelling vision, and I think a real clear call to action to have more of us, no matter which country or jurisdiction or state or district that you're in, or even a single site district, to be able to jump on board and think about how we can better meet the needs of individual students by leveraging open educational resources in a collaborative manner like this to address educational equity. So with that, my name is Rich Dixon. I've been able to be and have the privilege today of being your moderator. I'm the Senior Director here of Learning Innovation here at Hāpara. We're so thankful you could join us today. So thank you, panelists. Thank you, attendees. We'll talk to you soon.